very fine gentleman. I proud to say he's a friend of mine. I feel the same way about me, but let's bring up Mr. Tom Meehan of the United States Attorney's Office.
I'm an assistant United States attorney, and I have been such for 20 years. Before that, I was in St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney's Office for almost 10. So I've had a little experience with what Mike mentioned a minute ago about what police officers think out of the box. I will tell you this, their box is different than our box. So when he says that, it's just good thought process on their part. A lot of the questions that I get sometimes is what makes a case different than becoming a federal case as opposed to the state case, the ones that Neil handles in the Circuit Attorney's Office. What Mike mentioned a minute ago about this robbery and the person who was abducted just this yesterday, that generally would stay as a state level crime because it's a street robbery involving just a straight gun in someone's face and a victim. That is hard to translate that into a federal crime because in the federal statutes we have to have some kind of a federal nexus to the crime. Now what Mike mentioned was that he was caught with a firearm. If he was a convicted felon and the gun traveled interstate, I could prosecute him as a felon in possession of a firearm, irrespective of the fact that he was caught robbing someone. The difference in our system is that in the U.S. Attorney's Office, in the federal system, he could be sentenced as if he committed a robbery, even though the charge was just felon in possession of a firearm. They separate out the punishment aspect of it from the passive possession of a firearm, guy in a car with a gun, convicted felon, and someone that uses the gun in the active participation of a crime. So if that case would end up coming down to our office for any reason, and I don't come in, it would, because, as he said, I think he said there were 8 robberies and 8 armed criminal action counts. Well, that sentence starts on the robbery first, 10 to 30 year life. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. And the armed criminal action is a mandatory 3 years in the Missouri Department of Corrections. Well, that's a lot of time if you stack it all up. Now, you translate that to what it would be in our case, in the U.S. Attorney's Office. We would charge him as being a felon in possession because we don't have a federal nexus on the actual robbery aspect of it. And a robbery of an individual does not become a federal crime because it does not have the federal nexus. If I prosecuted him as a felon in possession, he could be sentenced as if he robbed somebody on the guideline. If he had the requisite prior convictions, he could get a mandatory minimum of 15 years if he is what they call a violent armed career criminal. That starts at 15 years and goes up. So what happens on that kind of a crime, that since the process of the city police department, their procedures, and the Circuit Attorney's Office is that they would have to make warrant application within 20 hours, 24 hours, or whatever. They have to take it down to the warrant office down there. There is no requirement that they come down immediately to our office. Now, on that kind of a case, we would review that case somewhere within the first couple of days. If we got a call from Mike's guys right after it happened and said, would you look at this guy for felon in possession, he would probably still stay in the state system to sort out what his criminal history is and what the maximum penalty could be. If it turns out that he is an armed career criminal or one worthy of federal prosecution, then we would adopt that case through the ATF or through just to stay with the same city police department. And then we might have what they call concurrent prosecutions. Since we're 2 different sovereigns, the federal authorities and the state authorities, both of us could maintain that prosecution on that individual. Sometimes we don't because in a case like that where you have victims, you know, your fellows that live in your neighborhood that will come into court and have to testify as victims in that case, a lot of times we defer to the Circuit Attorney's Office because Jennifer Joyce and circuit attorneys are representing the victims, you know, in your community. And that's why they're here. We come as a guest every once in a while, but the Circuit Attorney's Office is a constant here as the city police are a constant here. But we will then look at that case to say, Neil, what do you think? Should we pick that up? You want to keep it to it? Then sometimes we both stick with it. Sometimes they defer to us. Sometimes we give it, we defer to the Circuit Attorney. And it's all on the basis of who can make the better case and who can get the most time for what that person deserves. You know, in our system, if, for example, if the ATM Solution robbery last year, we adopted that case very early on because of the Hobbs Act. Now, the Hobbs Act allows me to prosecute someone on what might be considered a street robbery, but they robbed an institution who had some nexus or connection to interstate commerce. ATM Solution was involved in with banks and shifting money around nationwide. Well, that gives us a hook in the U.S. Attorney's Office to be able to prosecute that case, and we've done so. If, for example, the robbery that Mike just talked about would have become a federal case, on each gun count that we could prosecute, it's called the 924C, Title 18 924C, which is the use of a gun during a crime of violence. In the state system, it's 3 years for that on up. In our system, if you have a gun during the crime, it's a mandatory minimum of 5 years consecutive to the robbery. If there's a second 924C count, it's 25 years consecutive. So if we had 8 of those, it could be whatever 7 times 25 plus 7 is. So whatever that is. That's a lot.
The difference in terms of, you know, there's no realization, there's no.
In the state system, you do 85%, I think, on violent crimes. And in our system, there is no parole. You get good time and all that stuff, but there is no actual, the parole system's been abolished. And so you don't have that in it. There is good time and all that in the penitentiary, but in our situation, if we would pick up an 8-count robbery, street robbery translated to a federal offense, it would be 1,000 years, whatever it is. Because it's at 7 years and 25 consecutive added up to this. I did a robbery, a bank robbery a couple weeks ago. The guy had robbed 3 banks, 3 guns. That's 57 years just on the guns. And consecutive to that. But I mean, that's the difference when we look at that system to say, should that stay in the state system, or should this guy get 57 years, you know, plus whatever it is. And that's what we just kind of sorted out. Yes, ma'am.
I heard recently that there are new developments in that ATM case. Is there anything that the public should be keeping their ears and eyes open about?
The question was, are there new developments in the ATM solution case? I'm looking for $3 million, if you could help me out. Mike, you can. There were 6.4 million taken. There's been about 3 million recovered. We figured that there's probably about short of $1 million, maybe $500,000 in assets of people buying cards and piano bills and that stuff. So there's a pile of it out there still, and we're still looking.
The party's still missing, isn't it?
I'm sorry, sir.
There's a party still missing.
Yeah, lots of
You haven't got.
The 4 people that robbed the institution, the 4 that went in that morning with guns, they're all 4 in custody. 3 have pled. 1 they just got arrested about middle of August. So all 4 of the robbers are actually in custody.
But not all the girlfriends.
I'm sorry?
Not all the girlfriends.
They're currently charged, or at least 5 women who were involved in the transferring of money and moving it around. So they're pending cases right now. And then it kind of takes off from there. As Robert Patrick with the Post-Dispatch calls it, it's a gift that keeps on giving. Because we're finding and going on. Yeah, Mike.
Folks might be interested in knowing what a great job that your guys, the FBI, and our guys all did together. You guys track money all over the country. I mean,
yeah, that's one of the things I was going to mention about the difference between what we did. In this case, since it started, we've had the robbery, the 4 people that robbed it, and we've had a kidnapping that resulted, 2 young women that were kidnapped as a result of one guy saying, I didn't get enough of my money. But we also have had, what we have had the ability to do, we've executed search warrants in Atlanta, we've executed them in Houston and in Dallas. We've been up to Milwaukee on this case. The benefit that I have in the federal system is I can reach out to an assistant U.S. attorney in another jurisdiction and get a search warrant done there. It's more difficult, can be done in the state system as far as getting a state prosecutor in another jurisdiction to do that. But we have a better system as far as reaching out. We've recovered about $640,000 in the trunk of a Hummer in a storage locker in Atlanta. And God love the woman who put it in there, was complaining about how it was gone. I was sitting looking at her and I said, well, did it look like this? And I showed her a picture. And she said, well, it wasn't on the hood of my car. And she said, shit, you have that. I said, yes, ma'am, we do. She didn't know that we had recovered, we had gotten it out of the house and out of this place in a search warrant. Little fun things like that.